My name's Nathan Balls, and I work for Petrosys in the UK office. I look after our European operation. What we're going to do now for the next 25 minutes, half an hour or so, is to show you some of the work we've been doing with our Petrel plugin. At the end of the presentation, we'll open up the microphone, so if anyone wants to ask a question, by all means do so. Alternatively, you can send an email if you want to ask some questions, or contact your normal Petrosys contact, and they'll be able to provide you with some more information about the Petrel plugin. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a couple of PowerPoints and then just drop straight into the presentation and demonstration of how this thing works. Okay, so what we're going to look at is the Petrel plugin, and the version of the software we're going to use is Petrel 2010.2, and the version of the software we're going to use is version 16.9, and we'll talk about versions and which one is compatible with which later on. But the key functions of the plugin we're going to show you are really split into 2 or 3 different sections, and we'll go through these in demonstration form. So the first thing on the screen we're going to look at up here is the ability for Petrosys to map seismic well, fault and cultural data directly from a Petrel project. And as part of that process, you can then integrate data from Petrel with data from other sources. So whether that data is in your geoframe database or your OpenWorks or SeisWorks database, or it's some sort of GIS data, you can integrate them all together. And of course, using all of the main mapping capabilities of Petrosys. So we'll talk as we go through the presentation about how we handle different coordinate reference systems for a start. And the second major part of the plugin we'll look at is the how Petrosys works in the gridding contouring world. So how our surface modeling and gridding contouring integrates inside of Petrel. So how we can take our gridding contouring engine and also our surface modeling functions such as well tie and volumetrics and integrate that information into Petrel. And then finally we'll talk a little bit about import and particularly export data back to Petrel. So just to follow through a normal workflow of how we would see this plugin being used by a Petrel user, what we'll do is we'll look first at the gridding and contouring plugin part of Petrosys. So we'll just jump to Petrel. So here, as you say, we said before, we're using Petrel 2010. We've got 2010.1 up here. The software, the latest release of software, which is 16.9 SP1, will actually work with 2002.2 as well, and it's compatible back down through the versions of Petrel. Okay, so the standard Petrel setup that we see here, and what we're going to look at to start with is the gridding contouring. So we have a few extra icons for Petrosys, so the mapping one, and we'll start off with this one down here, which is the surface modeling part of Petrosys. So for those of you guys listening, if you're familiar with Petrosys, you'll recognize this window, and all of the functions of the Petrosys surface modeling capabilities that you have outside of the Petrel plugin are actually now available inside. So in this particular case, we'll open up a task or a list of instructions. We'll open this one here. And this shows you some of the typical things you may want to be able to do with your data inside of Petrel. So this is a short workflow that we've built, and the first thing that it does is to create a surface. So what the Petrel plugin will let you do, it'll let you take data, so in this case seismic interpreted data from inside of Petrel, and we'll look at that in a second. So we've got some seismic data here, and we'll actually let you go inside of Petrel directly and connect up to a interpretation file inside of the Petrel project and let you grid that. Now if you wanted to, you could combine that data maybe with some other data coming from some other seismic data coming from maybe SeisWorks outside or SMT Kingdom outside of your Petrel project, or you can maybe get some well data where that well data sits inside of Petrel, or whether that well data sits inside of OpenWorks or Finder or Geoframe. You can make combinations of data which will then let you grid up to create your surface, your structural surface. So the data selection is coming directly from Petrel. Then we have our standard system of setting up our grid geometry, choosing our methodology, and then the faults. And again, the fault file that we're using, the fault polygon we're using to create this surface is actually also coming from inside of Petrel. So we've got our Petrel project connected to, and then once we've done that, we can go inside of the Petrel project and actually select, in this case we're going to select the top etiv fault file. I'm going to use that in the gridding as well. So okay, and we've now picked up our top etiv faults, and then the standard ability to clip or smooth and also report the data as we're going through the process. So the first thing we're going to do is actually let that surface grid. The second thing we're going to do is just do some standard operations inside of Petrosys. So people familiar with the Petrosys operations will see here we have our grid arithmetic window, which lets you do operations between surfaces and constants and other things. If you've not seen it in version 16.9, there's some new bits and pieces in here. So we now have the concepts of some templates where we have mathematical functions which are set up, geoscience examples, conditional tests, if then else statements, and so forth. So it makes it slightly easier to remember all of the arithmetic operations that you may want to use. In this case, we're just taking our simple 2 at time multiplied by our average velocity grid, which in this case is a Petrosys grid, and we're doing some depth conversion to create a depth grid. And then in our workflow, we're taking that depth grid and we're doing some well tie. So this uses the standard grid well tie operation inside of Petrosys, which lets us take an untied surface and ties it to some point data. And in this particular case, we're going to use, again, directly connecting up to the Petrel well folder, so we can see where the well folder is here, and then we can go straight into Petrel and take some tops from inside of Petrel. Now you may find that your master store of well data doesn't sit inside of Petrel, so you want to tie your structural surface into Petrel from another source. Well, if you wanted to, you could actually you could add another source. So you could actually add data from OpenWorks, for example. So you could choose your OpenWorks project and then select your well data from OpenWorks if the data sat outside of Petrel. But in this case, it sits inside of Petrel, so we're happy. Okay. And the final thing in our workflow is to actually take the depth grid that we've created and put that back into Petrel itself. So obviously once we've created our surface and we've used the power of the Petrosys gridding algorithms and the ability to intervene by editing them or what we want to do with it, we might want to take the Petrosys grid and drop it back into our Petrel project, which is down here. So we could either select an existing surface and overwrite it, or create a new one just by typing in some information here, and again select an existing folder or create a new folder to actually put our input data in, and then we can control the elevation and the units that the grid is going to be written in. So this is the workflow. What I'll do is just run through the workflow a second. So we'll start off and it will go through, it'll extract the data from the Petrel interpreted files, it'll create our depth grid using the grid arithmetic, we'll tie the depth grid to the well points, and then we'll drop that depth grid back into Petrel. So if we have a look at the Petrel window over here, we told it to drop it into a new folder called Petrosys Grids, and here we see the surface that we had before. So I can actually change the color of this. Just change that to make it easier to see, and that should appear in this blue color here. So what we've done is just drop this depth surface back into Petrel from our Petrosys project. So that's in a quick look how the gridding and contouring part of the Petrosys plugin to Petrel works. What we're going to now look at is how the mapping plugin works. So to do that, we'll again drop into Petrel, And the icon we're going to use this time is this icon down here, which is the Petrosys mapping icon. So again, if we start Petrosys mapping, now the first time you start these processes inside of Petrel, it'll ask you which Petrosys project you want to start in, and if you want to change a project or create new projects, you can actually do that from inside of the mapping window. But apart from that, all of the operations again inside of this particular window are the same as in a mapping window outside of the Petrel plugin. So if we open up a typical Petrosys map, so we'll look at this this map, and this map is from the Gulfax area of the North Sea, which is the test area for the Petrel data set that we have. Now what we're doing here is showing you how we're going to open data. So even though this map sits inside of Petrel, we're actually going to bring some Kingdom and SMT data, which is some seismic data in, and we're also bringing some other sorts of data. So we're building up a fairly typical regional map with Petrosys. So there's a whole series of different pieces of information on this. So if we look on this particular map, we can see we've got data from SMT Kingdom, we've got data from Petrel, which we'll look at in a second. We also have data from raster imagery. We have data from a PPDM Oracle database that we're connecting to as well. So all of the typical things we can connect to in a Petrosys map. So if we go look here, we can display data from as we saw there, 2D seismic or 3D seismic from SMT or from SeisWorks or from Petrel. So we're not limited to putting things on our map which sits inside of our Petrosys, our Petrel project. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick look over here at this other particular map sheet, just to zoom in on an area we're looking at. So as you see, that we've got some seismic data here. This is coming from an Oracle database, which we can have a look at the line header at, for example. So this is coming from a PPDM data model database, one of our Oracle databases, and we can look at the coordinate history or any of the information stored in that database, even though we sit inside of Petrel. What we're going to do is just open up another map, so we can click on this particular map sheet, and a map sheet is a concept of Petrosys mapping, and we're going to select that map sheet, and that just drops us into a field area over here, which we're going to look at. It just draws our map. So as we see down here, all the maps in Petrosys have their own coordinate reference system. So when I put anything onto this map is in ED50 UTM zone 31 north. Any of the data that I connect to that isn't in that coordinate reference system will be converted to it on the fly, and the SMT data and the seismic line data which we're displaying on this map, which doesn't come from this particular coordinate reference system, would be converted on the fly. Likewise, the data coming from Petrel will be converted from the coordinate reference system of the connection onto the map and into the system we want. So if we wanted to change the coordinate reference system of this map to be something else, we could do, and all of the data would be then placed on the map in the correct location, as well as the other standard things you expect from Petrosys. So the ability to make the map a little bigger or smaller, the ability to make hard copy images or electronic images of the data easily and quickly. All those standard features are still available in this Petrel map inside of Petrosys. Petrosys map inside of Petrel, excuse me. So what I'm going to do now is display some data from my Petrel project. And the sorts of things we can display grids. So in this particular case we have a grid, and we're going to select it from Petrel. We're selecting the Petrel project, and then once we're connected to that particular project, we can go inside of Petrel, and here we see gridded surfaces either from the input surface or the input tab or the model tab, and these are inside of Petrel. So we'll just check this one here, and once we have selected the grid, and again whether it comes from OpenWorks or Petrel or Petra or ArcSDE, it doesn't really matter to us, we're just using that as a connection type. We then have control inside of Petrosys of the data itself. So I may want to change the color gradient, or so and so forth, or just change the translucency. So when I put the grid on top of the surface, it doesn't appear to be over the top of where we're looking. We'll say OK. So this particular surface, we'll just zoom in a little. This particular surface comes now from Petrel, and we're using our Petrel grid to as a part of our map, using data from elsewhere in addition. So we can tell that comes from Petrel by displaying the values. We'll just display some grid lines. That's the same grid. We'll just say OK. And as you can see, if we just zoom a little more on this particular surface is not a regular grid, it's a Petrel grid. So you can see the outlines of the grid that's coming directly from Petrel. So that shows you what the values are. And again, we can actually click on that and show the values and all this sort of thing. So the other sorts of things we can display directly from Petrel are the faults. So again, where are we getting our faults from? We're getting our faults from Petrel. And what is the fault polygon set we're using? So in this particular case, we've already selected it. We're selecting the top etive faults. And again, once we've selected the actual data, we control the style and how the thing looks. So we'll say OK, and as we see, these are the faults that we've actually created. If we wanted to export those to some sort of KML file or some sort of shape file, we can do so just using the power of the Petrosys mapping system to do that. We can also display wells. So in this particular case, we'll pick up the wells, with the well symbols, any annotation, any well paths, any top. So for example, we want to select a topetive top, and again, we're selecting the data directly from Petrel. So there's no case of having to transfer the data into Petrosys to make a map of it. We're just using the data from where it sits, and then that data will appear. And here we see our wells coming from Petrel. Now this particular one here, I might decide that I actually want to change the location of where that sits, and I can do so just by moving text around. So again, one of the beauties of Petrosys is you can use the powerful mapping capabilities we've got on any data type. You're not constricted to the data that you're using. Just OK with that and dump it back in the correct location. OK. Let's go back to a full view of this map. So once we've created our map, obviously we can then go create a graphical image of it, whether it's a JPEG 2000, a CGM, all sorts of different graphics files, or we could do something like publish it to a WMS server. We could export it to Google Earth. We can do all sorts of things with it once we actually have the map itself. But the ability to actually make that high quality map is one of the key strengths of the Petrosys system, and having the ability then to tie in data from Petrel in this case, or from all the other data sources that we can read from, is one of the big strengths of it. Okay, there's a couple of other things I'm just going to show you. One of them is the 3D visualization. Now, usually when I start with the Petrel plugin, people are interested in the grid contouring, they're interested in the mapping, but they sort of look at me and say, well, why are we showing you the 3D visualization? Well, there's some interesting things we can do in 3D as well as in mapping and surface modeling. So we'll just go back to Petrel and show you the 3D visualization. So Petrosys 3D visualization, let's just start it. Here we go. This is an extra module add-on to Petrosys. Some sites have it, some sites don't. We'll open up one of the 3D views that we've already created. And what it lets you do, it lets you display grids or surfaces from Petrel. In this case, as we're seeing here, Petrosys or SMT or whatever source we want to. So in this particular case, what we've done is we've displayed the surface that we made, that we were using before, the topetive surface, which comes from Petrel, and the well data, which comes from SMT. So it's, even though obviously in Petrel you can have your 3D surfaces and you can do things, in the 3D visualization you can use it as an integrating tool. So you can say, well, let's have a look at the surfaces in my Petrel project, or let's have a look at the grids inside of Petrosys or inside of Geoframe, and actually combine them together. So it's a fairly powerful tool that lets you sit the 3D visualization on top of a wide range of data types, pretty much the same as the map does, but look at them in 3D as opposed to look at them in a traditional 2D image. So again, it's a more minor part of the plugin, but an interesting part nonetheless. And the final part of the plugin which we're going to look at is the ability to import or export data from Petrosys to or from Petrel. Now, we've already looked at the ability to take the surfaces and then put these surfaces inside of Petrel, but there's some other little options in there which I'll just cover briefly just to make sure we're fully aware of them. We do have the ability to import data from Petrel to Petrosys. Now, all of the things I've shown you so far allow you to use the data directly and dynamically, but we do have the ability to import, for example, seismic data. So if you wanted to import some horizon data from a Petrel project to a Petrosys project, for example, you could do so. You can take a snapshot of that data. Now, people say, well, why would I want to do that? Well, examples are that you may have you may want to take a snapshot of your interpretation and take it on the road on your laptop with you. You may not have Petrel available on your laptop you're taking out the office, but you want to be able to look at the data that sits inside of the interpretations you've done. We can actually build a project inside of Petrosys. Now, again, that's not something we've done previous to this little session here. All of the things we've been doing are using data directly, but you can, if you want to, bring well data or seismic data or horizon data into the Petrosys project and make a copy of that data. One thing just before we close, one thing I've forgotten to show you, when we were talking about the ability to bring data directly from Petrel onto our Petrosys map, I actually forgot to show you that you can actually bring 3D surveys and seismic interpretation. So color fill, which is actually the interpreted data. So rather than the actual grids themselves, you can actually bring interpretation. So if you want to see where your interpretation is, you can actually bring some interpretation across as well onto your Petrosys map directly from Petrel. Okay, so that really, in a nutshell, I've been speaking for about 30 minutes. That shows you the things that Petrel plugin will give you. So to summarize, it gives you the ability to map, so directly display data from Petrel, the seismic data, the well data, the faults and grids directly from Petrel, and the surface modeling to use the interpretation as an input to gridding, and also the faults directly in the input to gridding, and also the ability to use point data from inside of Petrel to tie that data back in the well die process, which is shown you. As far as the direct connectivity is concerned, we can import data to Petrosys, and we can also export the grids back to Petrel from our Petrosys project. And as far as a sort of a final wrap-up, the software which we've been using this afternoon is Petrosys version 16.9 SP1 and Petrel 2010.2, which is the most up-to-date version of Petrel, which we will talk to. As I said before, we will also talk to older versions of Petrel as well. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation.